Hi everyone. Today I want to tell you how you can develop your thinking in Heptabase to gain a deeper understanding of the topics you are researching. Before using tools for personal knowledge management such as Heptabase, Logseek or Obsidian, my notes had a form like this. Here I'm showing you some notes about scientific writing that I took while reading books and attending workshops about that topic. I think there are a lot of good insights in these notes, but I rarely used this document because it was so unpleasing to look at such a long list of text. And here you see the same content in Heptabase in a whiteboard. It is so much more pleasing to use and leads to myself using that content much more often. For example, if I'm writing an abstract of a paper, I would look into my notes about abstracts and reflect if I did a good job and how to improve it. And if I learned something new about what is important in writing an abstract, I would simply add it to this card. So in this video, I want to show you how you can develop your thinking in Heptabase in whiteboards like this one. And hopefully you can see the value to your thought processes as well. First of all, I want you to look at the knowledge cycle where we are now at the stage of thinking. If you are interested in how to collect knowledge, I recommend you to watch my previous video first that gives an introduction on how to do that in Heptabase. Currently, Heptabase excels in the stages of collecting, thinking and creating, but they plan to improve the stages of discovering and sharing as well. But for this video, we concentrate on how we can develop our thinking in Heptabase. Explicitly, I want to show you how you can organize your whiteboards in Heptabase, how you can build up a knowledge space in Heptabase, and how you can apply the concept of taking smart notes in Heptabase. So let's get started. The central tool to develop your thinking and thereby gain a deeper understanding is the whiteboard. If you click into the Map Meta app, you see all your whiteboards. I experimented in the last weeks with different systems to organize my whiteboards and finally decided that the Para methodology from Tiago Forte works well for me in Heptabase. There are a lot of videos on YouTube on the Para methodology, and I'll link to one of them from another channel in the video description. In short, the acronym PARA stands for Projects, Areas, Resources and Archive, and is based on the actions required. For projects, there are certain actions required, which are my current projects for work. Areas are always relevant, and in Heptabase I create all my whiteboards where I am learning stuff there. And then you have resources where you organize your readings or notes from other sources. And in the archive I put all my projects that are finished, but might become relevant at a later point. And the main reason that I was choosing Para was that I realized that I need to have a distinction between whiteboards that I use for organizing my work and where the aim is to create things which I'm managing under projects, and areas which I mainly use for learning, and I feel that this separation helps me to organize myself better in Heptabase and not get lost. And I think that's what I also read from other use cases in the Discord server, that many users use Heptabase both for managing their projects at work and for building new knowledge. I have two additional whiteboards here because they deserve a central place in my scientific endeavors. One is for planned projects, which might be, for example, ideas for grant applications, and the other one is a Zettelkasten whiteboard, where I'm creating atomic notes that might to a later point move to other whiteboards as well. And I will do a video on my Zettelkasten setup in Heptabase in another video. As my projects contain some person-related sensitive information, I will show you my different areas. Here I define different topics that are permanently relevant to me, and this first layer of whiteboards only functions as a means of organization, like in a file manager. So despite the main function of whiteboards to develop your thinking, they can also be used to organize your whole knowledge system in Heptabase, because you can nest whiteboards into other whiteboards. But now I will show you how you can develop your thinking and show you the whiteboard about scientific writing again. So how can you arrive at such a whiteboard? The process will often be that you will first highlight some written or spoken text, and I showed how to do that in the video on collecting knowledge. If you haven't watched that video, I would recommend to watch that video first. So in the whiteboard view, it is possible to open your highlights in the right sidebar, and you can use that information to develop your whiteboard. In this case, I had all my highlights in this one source on scientific writing. So here I have all the highlights from the document, and I would often go through all these highlights, which would be called literature notes in the Zettelkasten methodology, and use them to develop my understanding of a topic or to trigger own ideas about a topic. But let's have a quick look into what else you can see on the whiteboard. Your most basic element here is a card. If you come from other personal knowledge management software, that might be called a note. In a card, you will often have the basic information about a concept or a topic. And you can then group your cards into different sections and use different colors for your cards. Here I created 3 sections about the general structure in scientific writing, about the title and abstract, and then the main body of an article. And in the right sidebar, you can also find a table of contents of your whiteboard. A feature that was recently introduced into Heptabase. So let's look, for example, in the section about the title and abstract. Here I have these 2 cards that are both in the same section. And to have my knowledge about scientific writing organized like that really helps me in accessing the information and making use of it when writing an article. So here you can already see that whiteboards are the central place to develop your thinking. But I want to show you a few more possibilities to gain a deeper understanding of the topics you're interested in and what you can do inside of whiteboards and cards. So here I created a whiteboard, and more specifically a mind map in this whiteboard to think about the knowledge cycle in Heptabase and how you can develop your thinking in Heptabase. Inside of mind maps, you can simply use text, but you can also use cards inside of mind maps. Here, for example, I link to the card on how to write an abstract from the whiteboard on scientific writing. I could even link to a specific block from a card. And we will come to what blocks are in an instant. You can also link to your daily entries, although that's a feature that I didn't use until now. And you can also link to whiteboards. So next, after mind maps, we have cards that you can put on your whiteboard. And these consist of an infinite number of blocks. If we go back to this card about writing an abstract, all these entries are blocks. And you can see that by hovering here where you see these 6 dots. Now, blocks will generally consist of your own thoughts. Remember, Heptabase's main goal is to enable us a deeper understanding about the topic we care about. But additionally, for scientists and students, it is very important to have your sources included. If you want to create something, or generally if you want to go back to your original sources. Therefore, I often like to include my highlights from a particular source in cards as well. Speaking about highlights, you can integrate them into both whiteboards and cards. I often find it more helpful to integrate them into my cards, but both is possible. And here you can see an example of a highlight integrated into a card. Lastly, we often want to depict the relations between our thoughts that we developed in the cards on the whiteboard. And we can do that by using sections, by color coding, and by depicting relations with arrows. And we will see how that works in a different whiteboard. I created this whiteboard to show you how the process of developing your thinking in Heptabase works best, in my opinion. We already learned that the central tool to develop your thinking in Heptabase is the whiteboard. And the main aim that you're using the whiteboard for is to gain a deeper understanding of the topics you want to learn about. And how do you do that? So particularly useful is the whole process of developing the whiteboard. It will always take some time, but that time is necessary to develop a deeper understanding. Generally and over time, you will most of the time have different sources where you will extract information and either put these insights on the whiteboard or transform the ideas of your sources into your own words and your own ideas, and gradually build up your knowledge of a topic. In this diagram from the Heptabase website, you start at the left, and by extracting the key concepts and by relating them to each other, you will gain new insights, and that is depicted in the middle part of this diagram. Ultimately, you will often care about creating something, and that's what the right part stands for, and we will cover that creation part in another video. But for now, I want to cover the thought process that leads to the creation of a whiteboard in more detail and go through 5 steps with you. The first one is that you should highlight what is important to you while you are consuming content. And all these highlights will appear in the Highlights Meta app, and you can access all your highlights from the right sidebar with the button on the top right corner here. In the second step, you should think about your highlights more deeply and extract the key concepts. I, for example, like to use a technique called progressive summarization, where I will go through all my highlights and highlight the most important highlights, and will then create cards based on these highlights. So typically I would be in a whiteboard, open up my highlights, and then I would go through these highlights, and then I would highlight again what is most important in my highlights to me. And then I would see which thoughts are triggered by going through my highlights, and I would then create new notes out of these thoughts that are triggered by going through my highlights. If you're coming from the Zettelkasten methodology, or if you're familiar with that, you would call these highlights literature notes. And I will tell you more about the Zettelkasten approach in another video. Now, steps 3, 4, and 5 are essential in integrating the newly created cards into a web of knowledge, and these steps might happen all at the same time and not in a fixed order. Firstly, you want to map relationships between concepts, and that is what I did, for example, here on the top, where I linked my cards with arrows. Secondly, you have sections, where you can group similar cards together, like I did here in this whiteboard, where I have 3 different sections, as you can see here in the table of contents on the right sidebar of the whiteboard. And lastly, you can integrate your newly acquired knowledge into your existing knowledge. For example, you might have read 2 books to similar topics, and most of the time it will be useful to integrate and connect the ideas of the two books into one or more whiteboards and not separate them. So now let's look at a bit more of the content of this whiteboard. Generally speaking, the whiteboard consists of the broader topic, while you have different cards on your whiteboard that represent all your different ideas of all these different concepts you have on your whiteboard. You can not only create cards, but also mind maps, text fields, or highlights, and I already showed you that, but cards are the most versatile element on a whiteboard, because they can also be reused in different whiteboards. So how do we create cards in Heptabase? Firstly, one of the features that resonated a lot with me is that highlights from PDFs or articles are integrated so well in Heptabase. So we need to think about how to smartly take notes in a visual note-taking software such as Heptabase. And here it is particularly useful to take atomic notes, where a card consists of typically 1 to 2 sentences describing the concept and citations of supporting information for that concept. Especially for academics, having the source at hand is very useful, and with the planned Zotero integration will hopefully in the future become even better. And the argument with taking atomic notes is that you, by breaking down a concept into the pure gist of it, you will gain a deeper understanding by writing down the core idea in your own words. This, however, doesn't mean that you can't have long cards, and I showed you already some long cards in the whiteboard on scientific writing. And additionally, if you have an important idea that you want to write down quickly and you don't know on which whiteboard to put this idea, you can use the daily journal for that. But now I want to dig a bit deeper into the differentiation between long cards and having atomic notes, and therefore I want to go back to the whiteboard on scientific writing. So here you have these long cards, and they are useful to me. However, I also created a sub-whiteboard for a comparison between these long notes and atomic notes. So for the discussion section of a paper, I created atomic notes and created a whiteboard following the principles I'm showing you in this video. So here you see how one long card is divided into a whiteboard with atomic notes, where each card contains only one concept, and these are arranged into different sections. For example, I have some general advice with 3 atomic notes, or some remarks on how to structure a discussion with 2 atomic notes, and a mind map where I link to the different sections of the whiteboard. And I can also use the right sidebar to navigate to the different sections. So when you want to make use of the standout feature of Heptabase, which is in my opinion the whiteboard functionality, then it makes sense to create atomic notes. But now I want to go back on the whiteboard how to develop our thinking. Finally, I want to recap how to organize your thought process. And what I showed you in this video is that you can use nested whiteboards to organize your whiteboard, like with the scientific writing whiteboard that had a sub-whiteboard just for the discussion section. And this can become particularly useful when your whiteboard becomes too large, and it is more useful to split it up into sub-whiteboards. And additionally, the nested whiteboards functioned as a way of organization, like in a file manager. Then we saw how mapping the relationships between concepts through arrows and also linking, which we didn't cover into detail, can be useful. And I will dive deeper into the linking part in another video. We also saw how mind maps can be used to develop our thinking if there's a clear hierarchy of thoughts. And I showed you how the grouping of similar cards in sections is a very useful feature as well. But now I want to wrap up. So we started this video with a look at the knowledge cycle, and I already gave you an overview about the part of collecting knowledge in Heptabase in a previous video. Now I tried to give you an overview about the thinking part in this video, but obviously there's much more to say about how we can develop our thinking in Heptabase, and I'll try to make another video about the Zettelkasten approach in the next video. Before I will then go on with the knowledge cycle and look how we can create, for example, outlines for texts or presentations in Heptabase. So see you then.